Hi guys, my name's Kieran and I've got my colleague Tom with me and we're just going to quickly speak to you about pharmacy. We will run through what we do on a daily basis, who we are, how we got into pharmacy and what you're going to learn today. I'm currently a Band 7 pharmacist at Fairfield. We work in banding in hospital pharmacy. I did my undergraduate degree at Liverpool John Moores and then went to Blackpool Teaching Hospital to do our training year. So it's a 4-year degree with 1-year training year, and then I've hopped around a few hospitals in Manchester, but I'm now at Fairfield, which is in Bury. How I kind of got into pharmacy, it was actually my grandfather. He was a GP, and way back in the day he had his own pharmacy without a pharmacist. It wasn't a legal requirement to have a pharmacist within a registered pharmacy, and then when it started to become a legal requirement, he really got along with his pharmacist, so he kind of suggested it to me, see how you do it, see if you like it. So I did some work experience in a community pharmacy. It wasn't a Boots, it was an independent one, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. So then I just kind of went on from then. That's kind of how I decided to get into pharmacy.
Yeah, great. So my name's Tom. I had a similar pathway, so I started off quite interested in medicine, pharmaceuticals, and then it was through some part-time work in a community pharmacy, through work experience actually in year 10, that I thought the pharmacist just seemed really knowledgeable and respected by the public, and that got me into it. In terms of fun facts, probably I was a junior chess champion when I was 7, so I represented Liverpool, so it's fun or sad, take it whichever you want. And then what will you learn today? So yeah, Kieran's already covered that, but we're looking forward to talking more about our careers, what got us into it, and why we think it'd be a great option for you guys to potentially explore as we look through this presentation. So a very quick overview of work right now. Like Kieran said, we work in a hospital, Fairfield General Hospital, and we're ward-based pharmacists with other responsibilities that diverge from that. But yeah, we primarily spend our time on the ward. So I'm on stroke ward at the moment, and Kieran's on acute medical wards.
So just like a quick overview of basically, so I kind of said how I wanted to do pharmacy, but in terms of the structure of how you actually get into the undergraduate degree and then how actually you become a pharmacist. So I obviously did GCSEs, picked my A levels. So I think when we were applying for pharmacy, I think it was a minimum 2 sciences. I think it was minimum 2. So I did biology, chemistry, I did maths, and I did history. I did not do well in maths at all. I can be very honest. I didn't enjoy it at A level standard, so I dropped it for AS. So I only did like a year of it, and then I continued with history because that was one of my passions, and it actually, to be honest, still really is. So minimum 2 sciences, and I think that they require chemistry as 1 science, but I had a friend who did chemistry and sports and then history, so it can be quite versatile. Went through the whole UCAS system, had various interviews. So to get into pharmacy, it was all interview based. Wasn't any exams, just interviews. You rank your choices, obviously, and then you get your A-level results, etc. And then it's 4 years at uni. So it's included a master's degree. So your last year's your master's. There were quite a few people that did 3 years and then dropped out and didn't want to do the actual Masters of Pharmacy. So they got a Bachelor of Science degree rather than a Masters of Pharmacy. And then from within your last year of pharmacy, you apply to basically get your training. So you can either get the training in industry, in hospital or community, and you go through a system where you have a series of assessments nationally, and then you get ranked, and according to what you ranked, you would get whatever choice you got in accordance to how you performed in the whole country. And then it's a year of training with an exam at the end, and then you're a fully qualified pharmacist. So at the end of your undergraduate degree, you might have the Masters in Pharmacy, but you're not a pharmacist yet.
Yep, so on the next slide, we'll look at what is pharmacy. We'll look at our role within the NHS and also our day-to-day lives as a pharmacist.
So sorry, I think some of the writing's gone from that pink column, but I'll just run through it now. So what is pharmacy? So we provide a medication service that is run by registered healthcare professionals. So like I said, at the end of your training, you become a pharmacist, you get put on a register, and this register it's more for the fact that you're in it's more to hold accountability, that you are able to run and be a pharmacist safely. You're ensuring that the service is a safe, effective service for patients. Pharmacy is also a massive team. It's not just pharmacists. You have various pharmacy support staff that we work really close with, and you're all vital within providing a service to your patients. We have quite a varied role within the NHS. There are a lot of diseases that are treated with medication, so we need to make sure that the patients are getting the right medications, and just ensure safe practices done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a couple of different sectors of pharmacy. We'll look more in depth at community pharmacy and hospital pharmacy. So community pharmacy, we've seen a few slides, but that is, you're probably quite familiar with companies such as Boots and Lloyd's. You'll often see community pharmacies on the high street, and the pharmacists, there'll be responsible pharmacists that's responsible for the safe procurement of medicine and the safe sort of distribution of it to the patients. There's industrial pharmacy, which is slightly more specialist, and yeah, I'll be honest, I don't have actual experience in the industry, but it's a lot more of the drug design and the research and the drug development side of things. So you often will be in offices, and you'll be working with other engineers and other people that are involved in drug design for companies such as AstraZeneca. There's hospital pharmacy, which again we'll look at later, and that's what we're in now. And then there's primary care, which is an emerging role that's become much more prominent in pharmacy practice, and they're often based in GP surgeries, and there'll be patients that, say a surgery has a couple of hundred or even a couple of thousand patients. There's pharmacists now who are really valuable for looking at the medicines that patients are on, to making sure that when patients come out of hospital, their discharges which are their go-home prescriptions, are put into practice, and that the right medicines prescribed following hospital admissions. And also there'll often be patients that are on sometimes 20 medicines that build up, and that's called polypharmacy. And GP pharmacists are really well placed to have a look at those medicines and take a sort of deep dive into them and see what's actually necessary for this patient. Are there some medicines that could be contributing to the worsening condition? So they're the four main sectors of pharmacy.
And then there's lots of other roles that we can get into. Tom's just covered the main sectors of the traditional routes of pharmacy, but obviously, as you can see today, we're giving you guys a careers talk, so there's a lot of educational routes you can go through for pharmacy. There are pharmacists that do, a bit of both, so they do either hospital and education or industry and academia. So it's quite good. It's not just, you're not getting a degree to just do one set job. There's lots of other avenues you can explore. So research is obviously massive, and obviously, as everyone is aware, COVID vaccine, that's been a complete new development, research of a new medication that needs to be given, and pharmacists are heavily involved in that. You can be inspectors. So as we said before about being a registered healthcare professional, not only are you ensuring that you're giving safe and effective medications out to patients, but you also need inspectors to come and have a look and see if the pharmacy is safe within itself. Is it running to as per operating procedures that we set out? You can be publishers, and there's a lot of educational routes that I think obviously me and Tom are quite passionate about as well. So obviously we're doing that coincide our hospital career. So we've got here the medication journey. So we're just going to kind of take you through just basically just the medication journey and how pharmacists and pharmacy staff are involved in each step of it. So first of all, it's manufacturing. So this is all about medication design and development, and that would be based in industry. So as Tom mentioned before, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, they're our big drug companies. So there's lots of steps where a pharmacist can be involved, and they can be involved in actual designing the actual medication, or they can be involved in the clinical trial, which is basically once the medication has been designed, how we have to measure if it's safe. Is it actually working as what it intended to do, catching any side effects? So pharmacists can be involved at that stages. And then they can also be in terms of development. So for example, packaging and stuff like that, medication might be suitable to be stored in the fridge. So then the pharmacist then needs to think about, okay, well, how are we going to design that packaging and stuff like that. So in terms of going back to the actual design of the medication, we're involved in ensuring that the active ingredient is correct, but also other ingredients to make that drug. You know, when you get those big tablets, it's not just paracetamol in there. There's lots of other stuff that help make the paracetamol get into the body and work within the body. So they're called excipients. So making sure that the active ingredient and excipient don't interact together. Are they stable within, you know, if you leave them out in the sun, is it going to be stable in that? Does it, like I said before, does it need to be kept in the fridge? And then we also need to think about lots of other things. So the taste and the colour and the size of it, you know, can it be given, you know, can you crush it, you know, for someone that can't swallow, or, you know, is there a liquid version? And then the actual packaging of it. Can we put it in the foil blister packs, or do they have to be kept in a little amber bottle because it can't be direct to sunlight? So there's lots and lots and lots of things that go into the actual medication itself. So that's what we would class it as manufacturing.
Yeah, exactly. And following on from that, when the medicines are manufactured, obviously then we receive them. I need to store them correctly. And sometimes this can be straightforward. So certain tablets you can just, as long as it's below 25 degrees, they can be stored on the shelf. But for others, it's a bit more complex. So there's lots of medicines that go into fridges, certain creams, injections, vaccines, a lot of medicines that need to be stored in fridges. So we need to ensure that they're stored at the right temperature. And we've also got a role to play, because accidents do happen. Often wards will leave medicines out of the fridge, and that can happen in community pharmacy too. And then we're the people that say if that's okay to use. So if a medicine's been left out of the fridge for 4 days, is that safe to use? Is that okay? Some medicines, such as insulin, should be kept in the fridge initially, then can be left out. We need to look into whether that's safe to use. We need to use our resources and our practical experience that we gain through the university course to be able to make those calls. And there's also control drugs. So these have to be monitored well and registered. So often we'll be involved with the checks for them, just making sure that these are correct. So control drugs are often things like morphine and some strong opioids and painkillers that needs that extra layer of security, and we need to complete checks for them each day and also ensure that they're stored in the correct conditions when they're received into stock.
And then obviously once we've made the medication, we've received it and we've stored it at the correct requirements, how is that going to get to the patient? So where we start initially is the doctor will prescribe the medication, and our first step is to basically check, is that medication appropriate for that patient? So is it the right is the doctor prescribed the right medication for what they're treating? You know, have they picked, you know, have they, you know, prescribed something wrong that or that patient can't have? Is the patient allergic to it? That's a massive thing that we need to be really careful with, is that there are patients that do have allergies. So a very common one is penicillin. Penicillin does have quite a high allergy rate for people, so need to make sure that they, you know, they're not allergic to it. Is it okay with their other medications? That's a big one. There are lots of medications that do interact with each other, but then also assessing the severity of that interaction. That's also a big thing. It's not just that, oh, two medicines interact, they can't have it, because that might not be an option. If you're treating quite a life-threatening disease and the patient needs that specific medication, let's say they've grown a certain bacteria or a certain bug and there's only one antibiotic that can treat it, but it interacts with their other medication, that's where we kind of come and step in and kind of find solutions. You know, do we withhold the interacting medication? Is there a different alternative? So we're heavily involved with that. Once we've decided that, you know, it's safe to give in terms of interactions, allergies, and it's for the correct indication, as it hasn't been prescribed at the right dose, is it in the correct formulation? You know, can the patient even take this? That's a really common one where the doctors have prescribed something and then they've kind of, you know, they've either overlooked that actually the patient can't take big tablets, or they have a IV line that it has to be given IV and it can't be given a different route. So that's a massive thing as well. And we get involved in a lot about how to manipulate medications and are they allowed to be given certain ways. So for example, like I said before, paracetamol, you can get paracetamol liquid, you can get tablets, but there are some medications that don't come in a different alternative, they just come in tablets, and we need to make sure that it's safe and it's licensed to be crushed and given with water or given with juice or given with food. That's a big thing. There's a lot of patients that especially we see in hospital that have quite a lot of swallowing difficulties, so that's the main, that's our main focus with them. And then the non-clinical side of administrating medications, we work within licensing of medications. So for example, paracetamol, it's licensed for pain relief and headaches, but if a doctor's prescribed it for something completely random, for something completely different, you know, does that have a license? I'll be able to give that. And if we step outside the licensing, well, what's the implication of that? You know, if we give a medication to someone that is not for a licensed indication, you know, what would happen? Would there be a severe reaction to it? Legally, is that allowed, etc. And we also prescribe medications within we have a formulary, so you have national formularies, you have local formularies, and this basically just lists medications of what are available within the Manchester region, for example. And if we step out that formulary, what does that mean? You know, is it because it's really costly? And the NHS budget for Manchester, would we be able to fund that? So unfortunately, there are a lot of cost implications within our job as well that we have to think about. So that's very much the non-clinical side of administrating medications. So we're just going to talk to you just a little bit about community pharmacy, and then how both me and Tom have been involved in community pharmacy. So Tom, do you want to start off?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so I started my career in community pharmacy. That's where I did my training and spent about 6 months as a community pharmacist. And yeah, the role of a community pharmacist is very much, they are in the pharmacy, the community pharmacist is the one in charge, is the one with the clinical nous, and patients will come in with a range of different things. So often it's just can be taking in prescriptions and ensuring that they're dispensed safely. But more commonly, you'll see patients come in with certain conditions, or bring babies into the pharmacy, or come in with ailments. And as a pharmacist, you need to know when to refer them on to a GP, when they can be treated in the community pharmacy. You need to be aware for like red flags, such as a baby with a rash. That could mean 10 different things. So you need to be able to ask the right questions to see if is it something serious? Is it something that will go on its own? Is it something that needs some simple pain relief, or is it something that needs a hospital admission potentially? So obviously you can see that if that job isn't done well and the pharmacist is the first person that the patient sees, then that could have potential really bad implications if the patient doesn't receive the right level of care that they need. Community pharmacists also run a variety of services. So things like performing medication reviews, giving out morning after pills, stopping smoking services. They're the person in the community that people can come to for free access to those sorts of services. And yeah, often they are well placed and have a good level of knowledge to be able to deliver them well. In terms of my personal experience, it's very enjoyable. I love the patient side of it. You've got patients, like you can't not be facing patients. So it really is good for building confidence with communication skills. I would say, and I'm sure Kieran would agree, sometimes the clinical side of what you can actually do as a pharmacist is a bit more limited, and we'll talk about hospital pharmacy soon, but you don't have access to things like blood results. You've not got easy access to prescribers like you do in hospital, and so making changes and amendments can be really hard to do. However, it is still a really valuable it's a really valuable role to have, and I've got some friends that are still in community pharmacy and enjoy it and are thriving in it. So yeah, certainly a career that can be explored, and yeah, I'm grateful for my experience in it. And yeah, Kieran's had some as well. Yeah,
so I didn't do my pre-reg training year within community, but I had a community pharmacy job pretty much throughout my whole degree. I really enjoyed it. You know, as Tom said, like you can't shy away from patient facing, and that was obviously something that kind of drove me to pharmacy in the first place. So it was nice to kind of get the experience of one-to-one patient facing time. The one thing with community pharmacy is that I found that patients really know and trust their pharmacist, which was actually really nice, because in hospital you don't get that. There's not enough time, or you don't want someone to spend so much time in hospital where you know them so well. And obviously when you see patients in a very acute and sick phase, whereas in community they're not always sick. They're, you know, hopefully with their medications, their long-term conditions are well maintained, so you see them in kind of a different light, which is really nice. It's nice to see well people. Yeah, I just really liked the trust that you build. Like Tom said, it can be a little bit frustrating only because you don't have access to everything, so sometimes you feel like you see a snapshot of something, whereas in hospital you've got access to absolutely everything. You know, you can then and there you can monitor their blood pressure, or then and there you can take bloods, or and change prescriptions and stuff like that. And definitely the types of disease states and medications that you manage within community and hospital are very different. You know, in hospital we give a lot more intravenous medications, whereas in community that's not going to be on someone's repeat prescription. Very rarely someone is on intravenous medications at home. So you come across different medications. So yeah, different disease states, and they don't always overlap. So it's quite good to get experience in both. But I think I'm able to handle more serious infections than I am for a non-serious ear infection, only because I don't see that generally on my day-to-day job. So it's nice, you're building different skills. Yeah, but I'm definitely glad I had the opportunity to get some experience within community as well as hospital, for sure. So hospital pharmacy. So my career so far, so like I said, I've hopped around a little bit. So I did my training year at Blackpool. So I went from studying in Liverpool, moved back home to Blackpool and worked at Blackpool Teaching Hospital. Did my training there. That's it's an established teaching hospital, so it was very good for education. It's a decent sized hospital, but I thought after qualifying, I kind of wanted to move to a big hospital. I moved to a hospital that have more specialities. So I moved to Wythenshawe Hospital, and they specialise in cardiology. They've got a specialty in HIV, lung. There's a lot of big specialities there. And I thought as a newly qualified pharmacist, that would be a good place to start off my career. So I was there for about a year and a half working as a band 6. And then I moved to Fairfield, which is a district general hospital, which is where I'm at now. Which is a smaller hospital, and I kind of wanted the smaller hospital feel. It's just, you kind of know everyone within the hospital. You're on really good terms with pretty much everyone in the pharmacy department. You within a year of being here, I know all the consultants, all the doctors, and it's quite nice. It gives a bit more of a community feel than a big hospital, because you're just one of many there, and that has an advantage, but it does also has a disadvantage. I also did, within my crossover between Wythenshawe and hospital, I did 3 months in mental health, which is completely different to obviously medical inpatient hospitals. So that was really interesting. Definitely gained a lot of skills there. And then yeah, over to Tom.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I initially had my training and first 6 months in community pharmacy, and then it was after that I got my band 6 role, which is basically a junior role. It was here actually in Fairfield, and rotated across to Rochdale and Oldham too. And yeah, like certainly the first thing I was struck by was just how much you needed to know. That was just a real shock. Like you get bombarded from all angles with how to administer drugs, how to doctors asking you what to prescribe, what to hold. Patients come in with impaired kidneys. What do you do about that? And all of these things just took me by surprise, because I guess I just wasn't used to that. But I've absolutely loved. I think Kieran would agree with this. Like even on a bad day in hospital, I still probably would learn something new, whether that's just a maximum dose or a side effect of a drug, or remembering something that I'd previously forgotten. You're always learning, because it's pretty much your job to know all there is to know about the medication, and you need to know the formula quite well as well. And you've got resources to hand, but it's a much better look if a doctor can ask you a question or a max dose and you just know it there and then. And I love that. I love being able to learn, and I think hospital, you're really well placed to do that, and you have the facilities and support. And another thing that I really struck me was you work with other pharmacists, which I love as well, because in community, it's nice to have the responsibility, but you're sort of out there on your own. It's just you in charge, whereas here you can sort of ask other people questions. You can bounce ideas off each other and just build those friendships, which is really nice as well. And yeah, I'm currently doing my diploma and hope to do my prescribing, which basically means that you can amend the prescriptions yourself, rather than, because at the moment we need to have doctors to do that for us. So might have a suggestion, but ultimately a doctor's a prescriber. They need to fulfil that. But I'm looking forward to starting prescribing. And then, yeah, I think what Kieran said about her experience in big hospitals is certainly something that I would like to aspire to, probably after my prescribing. But I do really like the smaller hospital as well. And you get to know the consultants and the doctors well and build that trust quite quickly, I feel, because it's sort of such an intimate feel to the hospital, which is nice. And yeah, so what does our average day look like? Well, Kieran is going to take us through that now.
So first of all, coffee. Definitely need a morning coffee to kind of get through the day. What I would start to do is, we have like a weekly rota, so I'd kind of have a look where I am. So as Tom mentioned before, I'm doing acute med, but sometimes you would have to, especially as a band 7, you have got a bit more responsibility. So for example, if there's been sickness or different absences, or there are certain wards that are not being covered, we would be expected to go and help or go and cover those wards. So you have to be quite adaptable and flexible. What you think that your day is going to start off being, it might not actually be that by the end of the day. That's a big skill, I think, definitely within pharmacy, and definitely as a healthcare professional, is the flexibility, adaptability. So once I've figured out where I am, I'll go straight to the ward. I would start off by basically liaising with my pharmacy team, seeing how the day looks. You know, you would basically, the way you would do it is you prioritise your workload for the day. So I would want to see my new patients first, so any new patients that have been admitted to the ward, my very sick patients. So we level load our patients to kind of assess pharmaceutically how challenging and how many interventions and what, you know, if we need to spend a lot of time on them, I would want to prioritise them. So I'd kind of prioritise my sick patients first, and then obviously prioritise any discharges. So patients that are medically fit to go home, we would need to prioritise them, because we don't want to keep them in hospital any longer than they need to be. So we want to get them out. And then just reviewing just generally my patients. So that sounds like an order, but that's never the order, because as Tom said, we do get bombarded with a lot of things. So just generally just being out on the ward, being present, ready to help wherever we can. So whether that's to give advice about how to prescribe something or how to administer a medication, or about finding where different medicines are. You know, if you've got, for example, a new nurse on the ward, she might not know where everything's kept. And especially with our knowledge of medications, we know that there might be a different brand name for a medicine. So it's just being present and just being helpful wherever we can. Patient counselling. You know, even though we might make these treatment decisions for patients, you know, doctors might make this, you know, change. They might change their medications, but we also need to liaise with the patient, you know, and see if they're happy with it, and get their involvement. You know, what do they want to get out of their treatment? So that's called medicines optimization, and that's something that we prioritise and we make sure we maintain throughout our whole day. Is that, are we optimizing patients effectively? So it's, you know, having multiple chats with patients, you know, explain to them, you know, this has been changed for this reason, you may experience this side effect. So yeah, just making them aware. So a lot of patient counselling, which is really nice. It's nice to speak to patients, and it's nice to see them get better and get ready to, you know, go home. Sorting out medication stock. So for example, with COVID, obviously changed a lot of ways we worked on the ward, and obviously a lot of treatment options. So it was reviewing wards some wards have a mini pharmacy where, you know, we have our own stock that we can give for discharges, and we can sort all that out. But then generally, you know, you have a medication stock room where, you know, for example, let's say it's a cardiology ward, you would have a lot of cardiac medications on the ward for the stock, because that's what they would be using the most. But it's ensuring that you would update the stock list and regularly review that. For example, if there's new medications available, we need to get them added to the stock list. Or like COVID, if COVID's taking over the ward a bit, then you would have to ensure all the COVID medications are being added. I think Tom mentioned before about controlled drugs, making sure that we regularly stock check and ensure that we've got the same quantity that's written down, that what there is in our cupboard. So that's generally a general, you know, what we do on the ward day to day. Obviously, we have other commitments but the ward. So, for example, like today, me and Tom, we're giving you this careers talk, so we'd have to fit that into our daily jobs. And then we have dispensary commitments. So at Fairfield, we have a big inpatient dispensary where most medications are getting supplied from the pharmacy. So, for example, if they didn't have it on their ward, you would need to order it, and the main pharmacy, you know, send that medication up to that ward. So you also need a registered pharmacist in there. So we all have different slots. So, for example, we might have an 1.5 hour slot, we might have a 2-hour slot. So we also need to fit that within our day. Other commitments, because both me and Tom were specialist pharmacists, so we are more senior pharmacists now. So we will have other commitments off the ward, for example, meetings, updating guidelines, you know, medication guidelines, lots of various things, different education and teaching opportunities. And then generally we just support other pharmacists. Obviously, as we said, we're band 7 pharmacists, so I would want to make sure that the band 6 pharmacists are supported well. You know, do they need any help? And then, or for example, if another ward is super busy, we would go there, we'd be expected to go and help them. Yeah, I think that's everything I covered.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the only thing to add to that really is it's hospital pharmacy. It's not a 9 to 5 career, so it's pretty much inevitable that, especially as you're starting out and at a junior level in hospital, and often as you progress through as well. Like me and Kieran now are still on the on-call rota. We still do weekends, so we can talk a bit more later about the work-life balance that we have. But yeah, on-calls definitely, they can be quite challenging because they run overnight, and it depends what sort of queries you get, what time you get them, what sort of things you're asked about. But you also do learn from them. And we have weekend working as well, where we need it all hours of the day. And yeah, there's pretty much at all times there needs to be a pharmacist present in some way for the hospital, and that will fall on us guys to do that. So for obviously the NHS is a 24/7 service, and that's such a great thing, but that requires us to be available 24/7 as well. So there'll always need to be at very least one pharmacist that's responsible for what's going on and available to answer any queries.
So we're just going to say what we love about pharmacy. I think we've probably touched on most of these, but these were just I think our biggest strong points of why we enjoy our job. Patient facing, I think that's the number one priority for us, is that we want to be able to give patients the care and compassion that we can give them. Yeah, definitely patient facing is the biggest thing that we like about pharmacy. Working within a big team, it's never lonely. As Tom mentioned before, we work with other pharmacists, which is really great, but that's not the only thing that's really good. To get to work with different healthcare professionals, and it's nice to know and see how they help patients and how they make an impact and how we can help each other. So it's just never really lonely, especially in the pandemic where you couldn't go see your friends and stuff like that. It was actually quite nice. There's a bit of a social side at work. It was just one big community. I mean, it's nice when it's someone's birthday, you kind of all make an effort, or even when it's a patient's birthday, it's really nice. We all kind of all just come together. It's really good. And then learning something new every day. There are no two patients that are the same. There's no day that's ever the same. I don't ever come to work and think, oh, I've done this before, or I've done this again. Like, we are always learning something new. And obviously, as you all know, I mean, stuff's always evolving and changing. Medicines, diseases, there's always something new out. So it's really good, and it's nice that there are so many different specialities where we can get involved and learn. Me and Tom were specialist pharmacists, but we're also rotational, so we will rotate to a different ward every 9 months. And it's really good because even though you might have built such good, strong connections on your ward, or you might know everything about, for example, cardiology, it's nice to challenge yourself and move on to something outside your comfort zone. So that's really good.
Definitely. And yeah, like Kieran touched on, like I was saying before, we're relied on to know a lot. So we need to know more about drugs than pretty much anyone else on the wards. We need to be there. And obviously we're a safety net as much as anything for prescribers as well. So ultimately we are the sort of last line. So if there's a mistake and it's not picked up on, then it will fall on us. So we need to make sure that we're there, we're making sure that the appropriate medicines are prescribed, that patients understand how to take them, and that we understand as well the rationale behind doctors prescribing them and challenge that where it's appropriate. Our skills are really adaptable too. So yeah, we can work the skills that we've built, like we can work in community, but the skills that we build more broadly, such as good communication, good clinical knowledge, good team working, they're skills that we can sort of take into all aspects of our career, and that we can take beyond our career as well. If we ever wanted to pursue something different or go into more of a niche role, the skills that we're picking up now will help set us up really well for that in the future. And then lastly, like we saw before when we were looking at different sectors of pharmacy, there's a role for everybody. So some people might love the patient side of things, and I think it's certainly something to consider going into pharmacy. But if you find out that that's perhaps a bit tiring for you, or you want it to change, there's other roles like Kieran touched on, like publishing, helping write formularies. Pharmacists are really involved with that because they know so much about medicines. So there is something there for everyone, and there's always something new to learn.
And then we have to be honest, and because we want you guys to know what the challenges we do face in pharmacy. So for example, the biggest thing is like I said, you see patients in a very acute and ill phase. So we do see some patients in a really bad condition, and we don't always see the improvement, especially myself. and working on the acute medical ward. So patients will go through A&E, they'll get a decision if to be admitted to a ward, and they'll get admitted to the acute medical unit. That's where an acute medical unit consultant will review them and decide, are they fit to go home, or do they need to go to a speciality? So, for example, someone's had a heart attack, right, well, then they need to have a cardiology bed. So we don't always see their progression, and if any interventions you've made, sometimes you don't see how that's panned out. You know, has that worked for the patient, or like, oh, did they get a side effect to that medication, or did allergy? And you don't always see that, especially in the acute phase. I guess if you're working on, let's say, a elderly care ward, you might see their progression a bit more, and you might actually see them get well and very medically fit for discharge. And obviously now there's obviously a lot of pressures within hospital, and we are relying a bit more on community services. So, for example, if a patient needs 10 days of intravenous antibiotics, but they're actually quite well, we will liaise with community services and see if community nurses can go into their home and give them the IV medication at home. So there's, you know, it's relieving a lot of hospital bed pressures. So that's why we actually don't always see people go home, you know, when they're back to their actual usual self. As Tom mentioned before, the on-call system. So as hospitals and pharmacy, we provide a 24-hour service. We work, you know, standard shifts, and then from when that shift ends, you would need an on-call pharmacist. So you would go home, you would carry a bleep with you at home, and you would get bleeped. So when pharmacy closes, which is at Fairfield, it closes at 6, and then it reopens at 8 AM, you will be the on-call pharmacist for that overnight. And it doesn't sound great, and I think it's our least favourite thing of the job, for sure, because no one wants to be woken up in the middle of the night with a big medication query or something quite urgent, or even something that's not urgent. It can be quite unsettling. But I definitely think that, even though I'd hate to admit it, I've definitely learned good skills. You learn to think on your feet a little bit more. You learn to be quite good at knowing where all the resources are kept. Because at 1 o'clock in the morning, you kind of just want to find out your answer as soon as, and we have a lot of resources at hand, but it's knowing where to look. So that's probably not one of my favourite aspects of the job. And then we don't do shift work, which is really good. Some big hospitals will make pharmacists do shift work, so they actually don't have an on-call pharmacist, they have a pharmacist present on site. But I think that's one of the good, really, like, kind of one of the good things, is that we are able to maintain a good work-life balance, because we don't do 12-hour shifts for 3 days and then have 3 days off, or we're doing nights. It is quite nice. You can still do all your hobbies that you want to do, and be a healthcare professional within the NHS. So there's good and bad, because we have late shifts and we have early start shifts. So I think some people prefer it, some people don't. That's just preference, I think.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. Just some of the other challenges that we face. So the demands, our time, as Kieran was saying before, is split between the ward and occasionally dispensary, and sometimes the two can become a little bit sometimes they can become a bit too close together. So sometimes you can be on the ward and you're being asked to help in dispensary, especially towards the end of the day, when you know that there's a patient that might need to be urgently seen, and you sort of have to drop that. Or other times you might have a dispensary slot, but your ward is really busy. And it's quite disturbing for you to just leave the ward there and then and go down to do a dispensary slot. So yeah, it can be, sometimes our time is all different directions, and then we have meetings and extra things which we tend to really enjoy. And if the ward's looking okay, that's good, but sometimes it's not, and the meetings don't just go away. So yeah, it's just making sure that we can manage our time and commit well to the ward, which is ultimately one of the key reasons we're there, whilst also ensuring the smooth running of the dispensary and supporting our staff there, and committing well to other items on our itinerary that we have throughout the day. Lastly, like we were saying before, hospitals, acute, we don't get to see the full picture. Sometimes I can find it frustrating, because there's a patient that we've done a prescription for, discharged, the medications are ready to go, we spent a while putting it together, and then there'll be something else that keeps them in hospital, like they won't have a care home to go to, and then the medicines get used and we have to do it again. So it's just a frustration that we can sometimes face. And then, yeah, like Kieran was saying, we don't get to see the full picture. We don't get to see the patient. Well, we sometimes don't get to see the patient at the end of their journey. We're just there while they're acutely unwell, and then we sort of wave goodbye. So there's some of the challenges we face.
Yeah. That's kind of everything that we thought we would touch on, just kind of give you a bit of an insight into our role and how we got there, and everything that we do every day. So if anyone's got any questions, we're more than happy to answer.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Oh, someone's got the hand up. Sophia.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of them was, you mentioned the band system. How does that work? Like, what's the difference between a band 6 and a 7, and how would you get to a higher band?
Oh yeah, we probably should have touched on that actually. So when you qualify, so each specialty works very different. So physios will be banded, but their requirements and experience will be different. Nurses is different. So in terms of for pharmacy, we once you qualify, you become a band 6. So in hospital, you be a band 6. That's a junior level pharmacist. So then to progress to a band 7, each hospital kind of has their own criteria, but in general, they want you to start a clinical diploma, which I've completed and Tom's completed. That's just an additional qualification that you do alongside of your job. It's basically just to enhance your clinical skills. It's very relevant to hospital and to the stuff that you see in hospital, because if you can imagine, your qualification year is broad, so it will cover all aspects of pharmacy. But now you're in hospital, they want your learning and your skills to be quite niche to hospital. So they expect you to do that, and it's just more experience. It's just showing that you're capable of leading a team, supporting junior staff where needed, ensuring that you can handle, your ward work and your non-ward work, that you have an active interest within, helping the service development of pharmacy. So that would be like your band 7. So we're kind of in the middle. We're a bit senior, but we're not so senior. And then you just progress from on there. So then there's band 8A, there's band 8B, band 8C, and then a band 9, which is basically the chief pharmacist. So that you'll have one chief pharmacist for the whole hospital, and they kind of oversee all the very high level operating, systems of the hospital and how pharmacy service can improve that. So each time you go up a band, there's different and there's more responsibilities. Generally, the more higher up you go, the more away from ward work you are going. There's only a handful of jobs that a senior pharmacist stays quite clinical. It is a lot of more managerial, operational stuff. And then did you have a second question?
Yeah, the other question was, how you mentioned the on-call bleep, is that something that you're given, or do you have an option to do that?
Yeah, so from my experience, I think, especially when you start out in hospital, I think most hospitals will require an on-call pharmacist, because, like we were saying, even though we shut here at 6, I think it's a necessity for all hospitals to have an out-of-hours option to speak to a pharmacist. So I think that most roles within hospital do incorporate on-call. It does vary what that looks like between hospitals. Like, I know some friends that work at Manchester Royal Infirmary, which is a much bigger hospital, and their on-call pharmacist, that's the band 6s that do it, and it's across a whole night because it's so busy. So they just do night shifts, whereas we sort of have it incorporated into our working week. But yeah, there are also some other hospitals where when you reach sort of maybe a senior band 7 or a band 8 role, you're not required to do on-call. But I think at least when you're starting out in hospital, you'll be required to do on-call. I don't know how it was in Wythenshawe, if it was.
Yeah, Wythenshawe. So some hospitals, they kind of expect their band 6s and 7s to do all the on-calls. At Wythenshawe and even at Fairfield, everyone does on-call, so even the senior pharmacists. And then some hospitals, because it's mainly the junior pharmacist, the more senior you become, you can fall off the rota. So it really just does depend. But I'm not going to lie, I do think a lot of health services, even now within the community, are going to be expected to provide more of a service for longer hours. It's not a traditional 9-5. So I think that's only really going to increase. I don't really see a service provision decreasing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all? Feel free to put your question in the chat box if you don't want to actually speak. So we don't have any more questions at the moment, but if you think of anything, I can always forward them on to Tom and Kieran to answer and then get back to you. Just email workexperience@nca.nhs.uk.